Hello and happy holidays! Welcome to this Christmas themed deck guide on Green Teleport. And before we get too far into this, I briefly want to mention, while I still have your attention and you haven't skipped ahead yet, that Tree of Everlife is something that probably caught your eye in the thumbnail. This is a really important card to talk about, I feel, so if you do want to skip ahead, make sure that you at least check out what I have to say about it. I'll drop a timestamp down in the description if you want to jump ahead. So this list will require the Resurgence DLC for a lot of these cards, and Laia here will require the Fall of Everlife DLC. You don't need to run this card though, it's not the end of the world if you don't. You can just substitute this for, say, another Runin's Guidance, and then you'll be running this list entirely with the Resurgence DLC. This deck is slightly more difficult to pilot than my green Beastmaster list that I made a guide for a few months ago, so if you're new to this game and still learning some of the mechanics, I'd recommend checking that out first if you're just looking for a mono green deck to play. This one also has 5 legendaries in it, so it might be a bit more challenging to construct anyways for a new player. The focus for this is, of course, teleport. So one of those teleport creatures is Zephyr Vulpine. This is an all-around fantastic card in a mono green deck, since all of your special lands are going to be forests anyways, and this represents potential damage anywhere on the board where you have a forest. So stepping into a forest is just such an easy mechanic to pull off, and your opponent's going to have to play really cautiously around any of the forests you've built, even if the Vulpine is on the opposite side of the board. And this also pairs really well with buffs, since again it just lets you represent even more damage across the board. You do have to teleport this to friendly forests, but you can trigger this ability by stepping into an opponent's forest as well, since all it states is that it has to step into a forest. So this is kind of a cool thing to keep in mind as well. You can also use this to double collect. If it starts its turn next to a Faeria well, and you teleport it to one of the wells on the opposite side of the board, you won't be able to double collect with this method if it starts not beside a well though, because when this moves into a forest, you'll be given an option to teleport it, or right click to cancel and just stay on that space. And if you choose to teleport it, it won't be able to collect until the teleport has completed. Duardia here, of course, works the same way as Vulpine. It's pretty much the same ability, but it also gains a +1/+1 buff every time you use the ability. And this also makes it really interesting combined with your Grove colors, because this potentially lets you get 2 buffs on the Duardia in one turn. You do have to keep in mind that Duardia's ability says whenever you move it into a forest, you may teleport him to a friendly forest, and then after you've done that, you get the buff. So you must teleport it again in order to get this buff if you're using Grove color. So if you play Grove color and teleport it, you have a second teleport trigger that you need to click in order to get the buff. And then either before or after, you'll have to physically move Duardia into another forest to get the second buff. So make sure that you plan all of this out first, have enough forest spaces to teleport back and forth, and then also realize what space Duardia is going to end up in at the end of it all. It's a little bit complicated, but hopefully that visual example helped a little bit to understand it better. So Grove Collar is able to teleport any friendly creature to a forest you control, which enables your big things to zip across the board just like the Vulpines can. Chosen here and Moby are really exceptional at that because they also have charge 3. So there's pretty much no escaping these 2 whales here if you pair them up with Grove Collar. Chosen is really important to consider with this also, since whenever Chosen would kill a creature, it instead swallows it and puts it under your control. So with Grove Color, this almost lets you pick and choose pretty much whatever creature you want from your opponent. Also good to keep in mind that the Swallow replaces the death effect, so any last word abilities that the creature had won't trigger once Chosen kills it. Chosen does have to live in order to gain control of that creature, which also makes buffs really useful as well to help this trade and survive to capture creatures. One interesting thing about Chosen also is that it's able to swallow a creature that has already swallowed another creature. So for example, you'd be able to swallow your opponent's Chosen even if they had stolen a creature from you. And all that gets trapped in its belly will be the Chosen, not the one underneath the second Chosen. But this is not the usual definition for swallow, because normally swallow, you're not supposed to be allowed to swallow something that has already swallowed something else. So I don't know if this is intentional or just a bug. It might be fixed in the future, but it is something to be aware of. And keeping that in mind, it also means that Moby does follow the usual rules of swallow, so it is unable to swallow something that already has something in its belly. So that's something that you need to remember. This is also a card that I find seems to constantly divide the Faeria community. Some players say it's terrible, some say it's broken. I'm sort of in the middle of all of that. I think in most decks is generally on the weaker side of things, mainly because of this 8 land cost here. The fact that it can't collect also brings its power level down a ton. But to me, as long as the rest of the deck has some other purpose to having 8 lands, Moby is sort of the same cost as a Last Nightmare if you ignore the land. And very worst case, you can just hide it in some corner of the board so your opponent doesn't get the creature back. This is also quite good in green, since green doesn't have any forms of hard removal. And one of the weaknesses of this deck, when your opponent plays a threat that they can just tuck in the corner somewhere and just protect it, such as Magda or Emperor Chaos or something, a piece of hard removal like this is really nice to have and almost necessary in a lot of cases. This deck is also really land heavy, not just because of Moby and Tree, but also you have a ton of like 5 land cost things, Tyrian Golem, Kodama, we've got Chosen, we've got 4 land things, Leia, all of this stuff. So it's very expensive, which means you're going to need some land ramp to get you there. So part of the reason why Wood Elemental is in here, but this is also really powerful paired with your teleports, since it gives you that extra surprise forest that you can teleport to. You can even use double neutrals here, play the Wood Ellie, and then extend even further the range of your teleports. Generally, you don't want to build double neutrals, since you should be prioritizing forests for all of these costly cards, but if there's a really good trade on something, then it could be worth doing that. The Explore card also does a similar thing, of course, so it also makes the Explore card kind of nice to hang on to also extend your forests a little bit more. Bloom Sprite is quite the champion in this list as well. It gives you a random green card that costs 3 less when it dies. And random things like this usually aren't the best, but considering the total land count here is 10 forests, you can play any card you get from this, no problem. And most green cards play into your strategy anyways here. Sometimes you'll low roll and get like a Forest Wisp or something. By the way, Forest Wisp is awful, and you probably won't ever be playing that. But usually there's always something useful that you can get from this. And my biggest consideration for this card was to give myself some more starting creatures. I only have Vulpine and Wood Elemental at the moment, and this is something cheap that kind of offsets the cost of all of the expensive things in this list. And you don't have to kill this off. It's an excellent little collector that can just sit in the corner somewhere for a while. Your opponent wants to clear this so that you don't get so many collections out of it, but that means that they have to invest an entire card into killing it, usually something that costs 2, like Soul Drain or Cypher's Wrath, and then you get back another card that costs 3 less, on top of using up one of their removal spells. The only unfavorable value really is getting ground shakered, but I mean, you still get a card back at least. Alright, so now we come to Tree of Everlife, and I'm sure this looks very exciting to people, because it's not a card that you often see competitively, but I think it's important to stay calm when you play this deck and not shoot for something that's so out of reach like this. 10 lands is way too much to get to on its own, and with this deck you want to be building up to 5 lands only, and then you draw cards or +1 from the power wheel. There's only 2 cases where I'd ever build up my 10 lands to this card. One is probably obvious if you get Blossoming Kodama, since this shoots you up to 8 lands, making you really close to that 10 land count. The other option is if you realize that your opponent is going to end up winning through outvaluing you in the end game. And this one's a little bit harder to detect. And it's quite risky to build your 10 lands up to with no immediate reward for it. But sometimes you can get locked in a long and grindy match and that you might see yourself just losing by the end of it unless you build up to this tree. But drawing and +1ing after you hit the 5 forests is generally going to be your game plan. This deck has a lot of board presence, so there are a lot of opportunities to control the board through teleporting and getting efficient trades. If you decide to go for the tree route, though, you'll have to start playing a lot more defensively and grabbing as many collections from the Faeria wells as you can. Remember that if you do this, you're going to be missing out on essentially 5 Faeria through +1s that you could have been making instead, or, you know, similar things with drawing cards. So make sure that you're absolutely confident that giving up 5 Faeria is going to be worth it in the end. You might end up drawing a Kodama after your, like, 9th land or something anyways, and that'll make you really sad. Also note that this effect that tree does happens on the production step, which means that the turn you play it, you're going to be investing 7 Faeria to essentially do nothing. Even if you have 10 lands, you want to make sure that you have enough of a board setup where you can still collect with your creatures and protect this tree at the same time. This may look like an auto-win card once it comes down, but there's quite a few answers actually that your opponent could have if you're not careful about it. Many decks that I've seen that run Tree of Everlife could simply be a lot better by removing it from the list. It's a fun card to play around with for sure, but I don't think there's enough good cards at such high land costs, and Tree is just such a huge investment of resources. I think in this list though, with the Blossoming Kodama and Bloom Sprites, I mean, Kodama pairs so nicely with your teleports anyways because it gives you those extra forests to teleport on. So I think that Tree just fits so nicely in here, and I've actually found myself using this card in my matches to win games and not just playing it as like a win more card like it usually is. Our friend Saturn 5 has also made a no DLC tree deck. If you don't have any of the DLC but are still looking for some fun Tree of Everlife things, this one of course is green-blue, so it's going to play a little bit differently from the teleport list. Probably has a similar sort of start to my green-blue beasts list that I made a past guide video for. But if you want to play around with Tree and you don't have any of the DLC, be sure to check this list out as well. Back to our teleport list though, let's take a look at some alternative cards you can use to build this a little bit more to your liking. Don't get rid of the Wood Elemental or the Vulpine for sure, and Bloom Sprite, if you ever want to replace this, make sure that you replace this with a starting creature, because like I said, these are our only starting creatures along with Bloom Sprite, and with such high land costs in the deck, you really want to make sure you have a minimum of 9 starting creatures. Even more could kind of be better. I find that the 4 land cost cards aren't too bad to draw into later, but definitely make sure you have plenty of starting creatures for this. So anyways, some cards that you can consider including swapping out with some cards. Seek Shelter is pretty decent. It lets you pick a card from 3 randomly generated cards that have taunt, and then it gives 3 life extra to those creatures. So value-wise, this is really good. The randomness can sometimes be not so great, and that's one of the reasons I don't like this card. I like this card, but not in this list. I don't see a purpose for it, but it's certainly something that you could consider. Another one is Deepwood Stalker. So this sort of gives you some removal options, but it's not the most efficient removal. It costs 3 Faeria to deal 2 damage, which is worth it if the Stalker survives, but that doesn't always happen. That means that the creatures you're hitting into have to have 3 attack or less. I mean, sometimes can happen, but a lot of the time also you're just going to be killing this off, and then you're spending 3 Faeria to do 2 damage. So I don't like it so much, especially since I've already got removal options kind of with my teleports. That's kind of what this deck is built around. This looks kind of juicy with Tree of Everlife, but again, Tree of Everlife is not something you're going to maybe prioritize playing right off the bat. It's more of a late game card, and I mean, I don't know, sure, the buffs look juicy and nice, but it's way too expensive to me to even consider that. But if you want some extra removal options, you can check those out. Standard green cards also, like Living Willow, are going to be good here. Like, this is standard mono green cards, I mean. So Living Willow is just solid stats, taunt for the cost. Really nice card there. Voice of Truth is sort of another mono green standard, which is really nice if you're facing stuff on the ladder that are gaining ridiculous amounts of stats, and you need to chunk those down a little bit. These are also really nice paired with beefy things that you own, like Tyrian Golem. This can be used on an opponent's creature or friendly creatures. So if this Tyrian Golem gets weakened down to low life, you can Voice of Truth and bring that right back up to that juicy 10 life stat. The 5 life is also really excellent with Feed the Forest because obviously it's a pretty useless creature. 1/5 stats don't do much, but feeding that can be very juicy. So, I mean, other standard green cards like Oakling, this is also kind of nice. Just remember that this last words give a random green creature in your hand +5/+5, so this will not trigger on any of your neutral creatures. So if you're going to kill this off, make sure that you have at least 1 green creature in hand. This can also be used as a starting creature in place of Bloom Sprite, which is kind of nice, but I just can't give enough praise to Bloom Sprite. It's done so much for me in past matches, and I'm just loving it so much. Grove Guardian, really good card. Ancient Boar, really good card. Could consider Eridan, I suppose, but there's a lot of buffs and other things, so I probably wouldn't run that one. Kodama's okay. Not being able to harvest is kind of not okay. And then the last card I wanted to talk about really was Oak Father. This is interesting because you're building so many forests, so you can really get this to a high life stat, but I don't like this one all that much. I think it's a bit too expensive for just a body that doesn't really do anything else. It's a really juicy feed target, but on its own, I mean, it's pretty big, and if your opponent doesn't have an answer to it, sure, it's a pretty decent card. But if it gets Frogified or Nightmared or something, it just feels awful, investing so much Faeria just to lose those stats. Also, another thing to consider, like I said, you just want to build up to 5 forests, so this is just going to be, what, a 6/11, which is that's quite a few stats, but I mean, Tyrian Golem is pretty much a 6/11 already, and it costs 2 Faeria less, and Faeria really goes a long way. I don't really think there's many late game cards that you want to take out of this list, and this is certainly a late game card, not something you want to be playing early. So a lot of considerations for this one, but I don't personally like it. Of course, also dragons are pretty reasonable. Emperor's Command is another one you could consider, although I think that buffs are a lot more stronger in this deck. I ran this in my green Beastmaster list, mainly because there's not much mobility there, so this can give your deck a little bit more range, and they pair nicely with Deepwood Stalker. But in this list, since you've got Teleport and you're physically trading into things with your bodies, buffs are much better. So Runan's Guidance and Emperor's Command are usually the interchangeable ones, and I think Runan's Guidance is just so much stronger here. But let's talk about the Mulligan now. Like I said, your starting creatures are going to be Bloom Sprite, Zephyr Vulpine, and Wood Elemental. So if you don't have any of these, you're going to toss away all of your cards in hopes of getting at least one. There's a lot of clunky high land cards in this deck, so it's really important to have some starting creatures. If your start is a Bloom Sprite, I would definitely toss away both of the other cards to try and find a second starting creature, since Bloom Sprite is pretty vulnerable. Sometimes it can get you another creature upon death, but you don't really want to rely on that. If you don't get it a second starting creature, that's fine. Bloom Sprite is pretty awesome on its own. And again, you can hope for that second creature from when this dies. If Vulpine or Wood Elemental is your start, you don't have to toss away the other two cards, because these are both pretty difficult to remove early game with that 4 life stat. I'd definitely toss away any 5 land or greater things, but you could even consider keeping like Leia or Dwardia, since they're 4 forests, and that's reasonable to build up to as long as you have a starting creature. Buffs are also pretty excellent, especially paired with Vulpine, since like I mentioned before, this can make your teleports pretty sneaky, get in an extra buff and extra value trade. Vulpines can also double collect quite easily, so you don't need that extra backup from your other creatures, so that could be a consideration also to toss away other creatures in hopes of getting buffs. But I really like having 2 starting creatures, I think. If I had Vulpine paired with 2 buffs, I might keep that. But also depends on if you know what your opponent is playing. That can also affect the decisions, of course, as well. Land placement is pretty easy to start. Most of the time you're going to build starting to both sides. Of course, you want to just be building forests. Drop your starting creature off to the side, and then from here, build to one side, probably build to the other side as well to set up double collection, and then from there, either push down a side to fight your opponent, or try to set up more collections in between the wells. This list kind of just wants to sit back for a bit and maybe poke in some clears using your teleports. Once you get to 5 lands, you can start dropping bigger things and getting a little bit more aggressive. And if you can figure out your opponent's deck early and realize it has things maybe that green can't deal with, such as Magda or Chaos, as I mentioned earlier, you may want to give up going down both sides like this, and instead just push down one side entirely, really aggressive here, to try and put on the pressure and force your opponent to use extra resources to deal with you. This deck isn't especially great at going aggressive early, but it might be the only option to win in the long run in these cases. This deck is pretty strong against a lot of decks out there I've been finding, but if you run into a card that demands an immediate answer like Chaos before it gets creationed or something, you may just lose the game unless your opponent hasn't done a good job in protecting it, which happens, but every deck has its weaknesses, and cards like those are certainly a weakness here. Only other thing to mention here is the Explore card. You never really want to play this unless it lets you play a Wood Elemental turn 1, or if it lets you set up a nice double collection for yourself on both sides, but this is also a really useful tool to save for extending the range of one of your forests, like I mentioned earlier, and getting a surprise teleport off. If you do use it early though, try to keep your forest on the well spot here, so that your Vulpines in the future and other things can teleport here and immediately collect. There is an option to save Wood Elemental here if you have a Vulpine in hand, like I do here, since Vulpine can easily double collect by itself, and then you can save this wood elemental to use as a trick in the future, especially paired with Vulpine to get a surprise teleport off once again. And I think this is a pretty good idea usually. The only case where I probably would play the elemental immediately is if I was facing Rush like I am here, since you want more creatures to fight and you probably don't need that extra surprise anyways. But in most cases, I think it would be beneficial to save the Wood Ellie and just play the Vulpine. But that's about it for land and sort of creature placement, so let's get into a sample match. Okay, so obviously gonna scoop all of that. Want to try to get a starting creature. And there are two beautiful starting creatures right here for me. Already investing into one side. Okay, water elemental. Fair enough. Probably gonna want to avoid this side then, since he can so aggressively jump up like that. So we're gonna drop our Bloom Sprite, hang on to the Wood Ellie for now. He could have an Emperor's Command, which removes a collection from us, but like I said, these are quite nice for tricks in the future. We might just end up using this to ramp up to these 5 forest cards though. We'll see what happens. Oh, second water elemental. Gonna nab that lake spot. So that's a little spooky. Okay, I'll probably be using my wood elemental here then. Something's gonna be standing on this land. One of these guys. It's not usually good to build a land for your opponent to step on. Actually, I'm gonna step this back so I can get into combat here. Not usually good to build a land for your opponent to step on, but in this case, seeing that I got all of these big boys here, it's pretty likely it's going to come down to on this spot, and I'd rather just not have him be able to extend his legs there. Gonna hop in range of my wood elemental. Interesting. Wonder if there's a sunken tower. Okay. Fifth forest probably is gonna go here. He's not gonna be able to reach my Bloom Sprite there. So I guess if this hits in once, I can have my Bloom Sprite back that up. So we're gonna do it like this. This gives 3 damage here, plus trading off the Bloom Sprite if he decides to go for double collection. And then we still set up our big guy to contest left side. So he drew, could have some humbling vision, but at least he can't deal with this simply with a humbling. Unless there's Mirror Phantasm, I suppose. Just gonna drop a Tempo Colossus. That's a fair play. That's certainly a fair play. Drawing could be an option for feed. I've got a lot of cards here to play. He's found 10 damage here. I need 2 more to clear this. 2 more. Grove Collar is 2 more. So we could... Well, there's no point in... So Clearwater Elemental. Teleport the Bloom Sprite, maybe? No, then he gets traded here. We could teleport Wood Ellie here. Yeah, I think we just set up some stuff. Set up some big stuff. So let's take a hit here. 5, 10... +1, and pass. Could be drawing for feed. Don't know if I want to risk going for that just yet. Would have been nice to have something to attack to contest the 7/7, but there's always a possibility where he finds like maybe Frogify, clears with the Toad, and then he clears the Grove Collar, and now I've got nothing to back it up with. So I think the 5/10 is fine coming down there. Not the best efficient trades here, but I think it's somewhat necessary. Could be a Frogify. Command. Fair enough. Oh, he's gonna clear both. So that was pretty good from him. At least I get the voice. Voice is not very good against blue. Yeah, this could be a problem. Do we need to draw here? Teleporting could be kind of cool. I think we're gonna teleport this. Get a trade. Clear this Voice of Hunger. Don't have a lot of Faeria left. Skywell. Skywell. Skywell's so nice. Ah, I can't do this. What am I doing? What am I doing? I don't have enough Faeria for that. Oh well, we take a hit to the face. Yeah, for some reason I was like, hey, ramp into Moby. That's perfect. But this is okay. I mean, taking 7 to the face isn't okay, but like, we could have prevented that. But not the end of the world. We have, I think, successfully secured the right side here. Can drop that Moby to take care of the 7/7. So 7/7s are awkward stat lines just as the base creature, but one buff is enough to deal with that 7/7.
Would you like some tea?
Going to value something. So I might actually be saving this Moby since I do have that buff. We can teleport buff something. Hopping here. Gonna play something else 7 cost? Let's see. Interesting. Okay, so I'm not sure why he stepped this into range. But he's gonna give us a free trade there, I guess. Don't have enough to play this plus. Wait, 6. Okay. Yeah, don't quite have enough to play Moby and buff, which is very unfortunate. I have to take this value trade while I have it. There's no way that I don't. And then we probably clear this with a buff and just take another 7 to the face. Well, we also have teleport. 4, 5, 6, 7. Teleport, buff, clear. Try that out. So the only thing this makes us vulnerable to is him stepping up and finding a creation for that Aurora. But We'll see. And that does give him the lethal. So I don't know. I don't see creation super often in mono blue. Could happen though. I think once we... Okay, there's a Frogify. That's fine. Oh, it's going to take a value trade. Okay. Oh, the tree. That's perfect. So now we can survive. So we're gonna go... A little bit sketchy playing tree though. When I just have this 5/3 that lives afterwards. Might have to set ourselves up a little bit more. I'm not sure. Definitely this comes in here. Step back, collect forest tree. That is an option. But we've only got this guy, which dies to Ninja Toad. So there's another option to simply set up Kodama. +1. Which I think I actually like better. I think so. But we're gonna head... Oh, this is interesting. Yeah, we're gonna step here. +1. In between the wells. But yeah, like tree is a consideration to play, but I think I need a little bit more board presence to play this comfortably. That's a 7/7, that's probably okay. Can take a value on the frog, drop tree. Or we just Moby, maybe. That's smart to jump here. Rudence Guidance. We are running out of creatures. I think I want to play that Moby. I'm looking at it. So if we Moby the 7/7, we could clear the Aurora. Clear the Aurora. Get 2 collections. Could potentially even buff. Double neutral's usually the play here, but I mean, I don't know that the neutrals do much for me. The forest is probably even better. So we'll step up collect. Play Moby here. A step there. Oh, it doesn't matter. Does not play around Ninja Toad or Command. Okay, I don't know. Maybe I'm not as happy with this. Maybe I'm not as happy as I thought I would be. Command or Ninja Toad clears that, takes my buff away, takes me out of range of being able to play tree. So I'm unsure about that. I do like this positioning of Whale, since it does still contest this spot and many other spots. All of these leg spots, actually. Time? Okay, it's just going to generate something, because he already played the Aurora. So now he's getting those big 6/6s, but this is looking excellent for me. Now I can safely get the tree down, because we get to collect. Clear this Toad. We've got the perfect spot for this tree to come down with a +1. Let's see. I'd like to protect this as much as possible, so I think this goes here. Tree. Yeah, tree in this spot is probably where I want it. It is in range of the 6/6 over there, but I think that's okay. That's probably fine. So tree can come down. I'm actually thinking I'm gonna... He has no access to Aurora, actually. Only thing that can come down here is he jumps Phantasms, but then he'll need another card, so perfectly happy to stay there. There's the victory. No way for him to deal with tree. So that's super important. Before you play tree, you need to make sure that you have proper board set up to protect it and have collection set up. So in this position, it almost could have been considered like a win more card here, because I don't know. I might have been able to hold off with the cards that I had in hand, but it still could have gone either way. With the tree though, that certainly puts me over the edge. So thanks for watching. This deck is something I've had a ton of fun with so far, and I'm really liking where it's going. I'm so surprised at how well it's doing. So I hope you have fun with it as well, and good luck with your matches.